In the heart of an unforgiving winter, where the forest's skeletal trees clawed at a gray sky, there stood a remote, weather-beaten cabin. Its chimney puffed thin threads of smoke into the chill, a solitary signal of warmth amidst the endless white. Inside, Elara, a young wildlife researcher, had taken refuge after a failed expedition. Her team had retreated days ago, defeated by the relentless snowstorm, but Elara stayed, driven by a stubborn resolve to complete her study on the region's elusive wolf packs. Elara was no stranger to isolation. As a child, she had spent hours wandering the woods behind her family's home, tracking animal prints, memorizing bird calls, and marveling at the quiet mysteries of nature. The solitude of the forest had always been a comfort to her, a refuge from the noise and confusion of people. Yet here, in the frozen grasp of winter, the silence seemed heavier, pressing against her chest like a weight. Her days became a monotonous cycle, documenting tracks, analyzing patterns, and listening for the echoes of distant howls. The forest, blanketed in silence and snow, was both a sanctuary and a prison. The isolation gnawed at her, yet the thought of leaving without her research unfinished gnawed harder. Her research journal was filled with scattered notes, rough sketches of paw prints, and speculations about the wolves' movements. One morning, while mapping trails near the edge of the forest, Elara noticed something amiss, a disturbance in the untouched snow. Her breath clouded the air as she crouched, her gloved hand brushing against the red-stained snow. Bloody tracks cut sharply through the white, a trail of desperation that led her to a collapsed form. A wolf, its leg twisted unnaturally, its fur matted and stained. Instincts warred within her. The researcher in her knew the dangers, the boundaries between human and wild. Wolves were not pets. They were creatures of instinct and survival. Yet the sight of the creature's labored breathing and hollow, exhausted eyes reached into her heart. The wolf's chest rose and fell rapidly, its breath ragged. Each exhale seemed a battle, a fight against the cold that sought to steal its last warmth. Against reason, Elara carefully approached the wolf, her movements deliberate and slow. The creature's eyes opened, glimmering with a mixture of pain and fear. It bared its teeth weakly, a silent warning. Elara paused, her heart pounding, but the desperation in the wolf's eyes held her. Gently, she draped her jacket over the animal's shivering body, a thin barrier against the biting cold. The journey back to the cabin was grueling. The wolf's weight pressed heavily against her shoulders, each step a struggle against the deep snow. The wind cut through her layers, stinging her cheeks, but she pressed on, determined. The cabin's outline finally appeared through the swirling snow, a dark, solitary silhouette. Inside, Elara laid the wolf near the fireplace, its body limp and unresponsive. She worked quickly, her fingers trembling as she cleaned its wounds, splinting the injured leg with a makeshift brace from broken chair legs. The wolf's breathing was shallow, each exhale a fragile thread tethering it to life. Throughout the night, Elara sat beside the animal, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but unwilling to leave its side. The storm outside raged on, the wind howling like the cries of the wolf pack she had sought to study. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. The wolf stirred fitfully in its restless sleep, its body tense with pain. Elara's voice, quiet and steady, filled the room as she spoke to the injured creature. Fragments of stories from her childhood, memories of the forest trails she had once explored. She spoke of her fascination with wolves, of their misunderstood nature, their complex social bonds. The words were not meant to soothe, but to fill the silence, a way to remind herself that they were both still alive. As dawn broke, the blizzard's fury eased, leaving a thick, heavy silence in its wake. The wolf's eyes opened slowly, its gaze meeting Elara's. The pain remained, but the wild fear had dimmed, replaced by a wary curiosity. Elara held her breath, unsure of what would come next. Would the wolf lash out, driven by instinct? Would it flee the moment it could stand? But the wolf did not move. It lay still, its eyes locked with Elara's. A tentative truce formed in the quiet space between them. The bond was fragile, a thread that could snap at any moment, yet it was there, woven by the storm and the shared isolation of the forest. For the first time since her team had left, Elara felt a semblance of hope. The forest's silence was no longer a suffocating weight, but a space where connection could grow. The days ahead would be uncertain, a delicate balance between the wild and the human. But for now, in the warmth of the cabin, two loners had found a moment of understanding in the heart of winter. Days turned to weeks, and the storm's fury gradually subsided, though the cold remained an unyielding presence. Elara and the wolf fell into a quiet routine, an awkward coexistence shaped by necessity. The wolf, whom Elara tentatively named Ash for his gray, storm-colored fur, tested the boundaries of the cabin. His leg, though mending, was still unsteady, a reminder of vulnerability. Elara documented his behavior in her journal, observations layered with curiosity and caution. She noted how Ash flinched at sudden movements, the way his eyes darted to the windows at the slightest sound. His instincts never fully dulled despite his weakened state. In her mind, the cabin was a microcosm, a place where the primal and the human intersected. Ash observed her too, his amber eyes sharp and alert, never fully letting his guard down. The fear that once clouded his gaze was now tempered by curiosity, a hesitant acceptance of the woman who had saved his life. He moved cautiously, each step deliberate, as if constantly assessing whether this fragile peace would hold. There were days when Elara wondered if Ash understood more than he let on, if, in some way, he recognized that their tenuous bond was a suspension of the natural order. Sometimes, in the silence of the cabin, Elara spoke aloud. She spoke of her research, her frustrations, the family that never understood her passion for the wild, and the team that had abandoned the expedition. Her words were met with the wolf's steady, unwavering gaze. In those moments, Ash became an unexpected confidant, a presence that listened without judgment, a companion in the isolation of the endless winter. There were attempts to breach the divide. Elara once placed her hand outstretched, an offering without expectation. Ash hesitated, his instincts pulling him back, but the need for warmth and connection brought him forward. His cold, wet nose brushed her fingers before he recoiled, wary yet curious. It was a small step, but it lingered with her, a symbol of their fragile understanding. The first true sign of their bond came one quiet evening as the sun set, painting the snow with hues of soft gold and pale rose. Elara sat by the fireplace, her journal open but forgotten. Ash limped toward her, his gait still uneven, and rested his head on her knee. The weight of his trust was both heartwarming and bittersweet, a silent acknowledgement that, in this confined space, they were no longer enemies but reluctant allies. Elara's hand hovered before she gently rested it on Ash's coarse fur. The wolf stiffened but did not pull away. Her fingers brushed against the matted patches of his coat, the scars hidden beneath. She wondered what battles had marked him, what losses had driven him to the brink of collapse that fateful day. Yet the wildness in Ash never fully disappeared. On restless nights, he would pace the cabin's perimeter, his eyes gleaming with the primal instinct to run, to return to the untamed wilderness beyond the walls. Elara knew that their bond was temporary, a pause in the flow of the forest's unyielding order. The thought lingered, a quiet ache at the edges of her heart. Outside, the forest began to thaw. The snow receded reluctantly, revealing earth hardened by frost. Tracks of deer and hares reappeared, drawing Ash's attention to the window. His instincts stirred, a reminder that his place was among the wild, not beside a human hearth. One afternoon, while Elara ventured out to collect firewood, she returned to find Ash staring intently at the closed door. She hesitated before opening it wider, a silent invitation. Ash stepped forward, his nose quivering as he took in the fresh, cold air. His muscles tensed, a coil of untapped energy, a primal force that had been restrained for weeks. But he looked back at her, a glance that lasted just a moment, yet carried the weight of their unspoken connection. Then he stepped back inside, the choice made, yet not fully understood. Elara's heart ached with the knowledge that the day would come when that decision would be different, when Ash's instincts would pull him beyond her reach. The days grew longer, the air less biting. The forest called to Ash with increasing insistence. Elara could see the restlessness growing in him, the way his gaze lingered at the window, the twitch of his ears at the distant calls of his kin. Their bond, fragile and precious, felt like an hourglass running out. Elara began preparing herself for the inevitable. She eased back on their shared moments, letting Ash reclaim his space. It was a subtle loosening, a quiet preparation for the goodbye she knew was coming. Her journal entries became more reflective. One evening, as twilight softened the forest in shades of gray and violet, Ash stood by the door. His ears perked, his body taut. Elara's breath caught as she realized what was happening. She opened the door slowly, the chill of the evening air biting against her skin. Ash stepped out, his paws pressing into the softened earth. He looked back once more, his amber eyes meeting hers with a gaze that seemed both grateful and resigned. A part of her wanted to call out, to stop him, to preserve what they had built, but she knew that to hold him back would be a cruelty, a denial of his nature. The wolf slipped into the twilight, a shadow merging with the wild that had shaped him. Elara stood there long after he had gone, the chill seeping through her bones, the silence of the cabin an echo of what it had held. Her journal remained open on the table, the pages half filled with notes, sketches, and fragmented thoughts. She picked up her pen and began to write, a record not of a researcher's observations, but of a bond that defied the boundaries of instinct and intellect, a story of trust, of vulnerability, of a wolf and a woman caught between worlds. In the days that followed, Elara continued her work, her heart a little heavier yet fuller. The forest had given her something beyond data and analysis, a glimpse into the complexity of survival, the delicate balance between fear and trust. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, she thought she heard a distant howl, a sound both mournful and resolute, a voice calling to the wild. And though she knew it was only the forest reclaiming its own, a part of her hoped it was Ash, remembering the warmth of a fire and the quiet company of a woman who had dared to reach out across the divide. The call of the wild. As spring began to edge out winter's chill, the forest awoke from its icy slumber. Snowdrifts thinned, and the air grew lighter, carrying the earthy scent of thawing ground. Birds tentatively returned to the trees, their morning songs an uncertain chorus of renewal. Streams that had been frozen veins now trickled with life, threading through the forest floor like whispers. Ash's leg had healed, and his strength returned. His once cautious steps now carried the confidence of a creature who had tasted both survival and sanctuary. Each day he paced the cabin restlessly, his eyes darting to the window, ears twitching at every sound beyond the walls. The confinement that had been his shelter during the storm now felt like a boundary, an invisible line holding him back from his true nature. Elara sensed the change in him, a restless energy that hung in the air like static before a storm. The bond they had formed, as delicate and unspoken as it was, could not contain the wild heart of the wolf. She knew it was only a matter of time before Ash followed the call of the forest, the instinct to roam, to hunt, to join his kin in the untamed expanse. Her research, the very reason for her presence in this remote, harsh land, had taken on a new weight. What began as a study of the elusive wolf packs had transformed into an unintended partnership with a creature of that world. The data she had meticulously gathered now felt like a reflection of their time together, a chronicle of trust that had grown quietly, like frost creeping across a window pane. Despite her resolve to remain an observer, not a disruptor of nature, Elara found herself hesitating. She feared the silence that would follow Ash's departure, the absence of his steady, watchful gaze that had become a comfort. The cabin, with its creaking floorboards and smoke-scented walls, would feel colder, emptier. The forest that had been her study, her sanctuary, now loomed as a vast, indifferent wilderness. In the days leading to his departure, Elara noticed Ash testing his boundaries more frequently. He began to slip outside for longer stretches, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Each time he returned, his coat carried the scent of the wild, damp earth, pine, the musk of hidden creatures. It was as though he was reacquainting himself with a world that had been momentarily out of reach. On the morning of his departure, the air was crisp and clear, the sunlight filtering through the trees in golden shafts. Ash stood at the cabin's threshold, his body half turned toward the forest. The moment hung suspended like a breath held too long. Elara's throat tightened, a knot of conflicted emotions constricting her words. She knelt beside him, her hand resting gently against his fur, feeling the steady pulse of life beneath. Ash's eyes met hers, a flicker of understanding passing between them. Gratitude, perhaps, or a silent farewell. In his Elara watched as he disappeared into the trees, his form blending seamlessly with the shifting shadows. The forest, which had been a canvas for her research, now seemed vaster, more profound. It held within it the mystery of Ash's journey, a narrative that would continue beyond her reach. That night, as the fire crackled softly, Elara sat alone, listening for a sound she knew she might never hear again. The echoing howl of a wolf, calling from the heart of the wild. Her notes lay scattered across the table, pages filled with meticulous observations and fragmented memories. Yet the most significant chapter of her research was one that could not be measured, recorded, or quantified. Days passed, and Elara resumed her work with a renewed, tempered perspective. The data she gathered now felt more intimate, each track in the snow a reminder of Ash's presence. She followed the trails of other wolves, tracing their paths through the forest, wondering if Ash ran among them. The loneliness of the cabin, once a heavy weight, had lightened. The silence no longer pressed against her, but settled like a familiar companion. Weeks later, as dawn broke over the forest, a distant howl pierced the quiet. Elara froze, her breath caught in her throat. The call was unmistakable, a lone wolf, strong and resolute, a voice carrying across the expanse of trees. She stepped out onto the porch, the morning air biting and sharp. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching the forest's edge, but saw nothing but the sway of branches and the glimmer of morning light. A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, a bittersweet acknowledgment of what she could not possess yet had been privileged to witness. Ash was where he belonged, a creature of the wild, a ghost among the trees, a memory that would remain etched in the landscape of her mind. Her research, once a quest for answers, had become a testament to the unpredictable, untamable nature of the wild. The data she collected, numbers, charts, and graphs, would serve their purpose in academia, but the story of Ash would live beyond the confines of scientific analysis. It was a story of instinct and survival, of trust forged in silence, and of a bond destined to break yet never truly sever. As the seasons continued to turn, the forest would change. Trees would grow taller, rivers would shift, and wolves would roam. But the echo of a lone wolf's howl would always carry a resonance that reached beyond the wilderness, into the heart of a researcher who had, for a time, bridged the fragile boundary between human and wild.